Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Hasidut. Continue with our series on the life and teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Before we start tonight, I think it's very, very appropriate to mention that this is Gimel Tammuz, and it is the 30th yahrzeit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. 30 years. So, what an influence he had on the entire generation, the entire world. There are really no words to describe what a spiritual giant he was, and continues to be. You know, it says in the Zohar that after a tzaddik leaves this world, his influence doubles, it increases. And so I remember very well when the Rebbe first passed away, for the first year or two, there were many, many doubts whether the Chabad movement would survive without the Rebbe. Not only has it survived, but it has thrived. Absolutely incredible. It's something like, don't quote me on these figures, but I think when the Rebbe passed away, there was something like 900 Chabad institutions around the world. It's like quadrupled, literally quadrupled in the last 30 years. When the Rebbe passed away, there were like shlichim, one or two in like every city. Now it's pretty much every suburb of every city. It's true. I know it for a fact. And it's just incredible. So we are dedicating our learning in a great appreciation and in commemoration for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel ben Levi Yitzchak. He should have an aliyah to neshama, and his influence should continue to spread light and Torah to the whole world. And while we're at it, we should also dedicate our learning to Refuah Shlema, for Rabbi Ginsburg, Rabbi Yitzchak Feivish ben Brian Malka should have a Refuah Shlema. Okay, what we're doing tonight, we're continuing what we started last week and the week before, is individual, call it pearls of wisdom from the Baal Shem Tov. In the beginning of the series, we dealt more in a general way with the direction or the thrust of the Hasidic movement based on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. And now we're getting into specific teachings, and there are many, 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 many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chidushim. So this is just a sample right now. We probably will be doing it this week and next week. And then my hope is to spend a substantial time on the Baal Shem Tov and his teachings about prayer. Like very specifically, we're going to hone in on prayer, and not just the general ideas, but specific ideas that he gave over and that are written down by his students and students of students, and we have them in our possession. So as I've said, these individual gems from the Baal Shem Tov are in no particular order. It's just the order that I wrote them down in my own notes to give over. So each one is like really a world of its own. So we're going to start with, we know that on the first day of creation, light was created. And it says that God looked at the light and it was good. So that seems pretty clear. Rashi tells us something that we wouldn't have thought on our own. Of course, it's from the sages. So he says, what does it mean it was good? So Rashi says it was good to hide away for the tzaddikim in the time to come. So those who weren't such tzaddikim wouldn't have access to this light. That's what Rashi says. We're told in Kabbalah that this light was far beyond a physical light. It was really the infinite light of God. And so according to tradition, it's called the hidden light, or Haganuz, the light that was hidden away. And we know that the light of the sun is only created on the fourth day. So that's already a hint that this light we're talking about is some kind of transcendental, divine, infinite type of light. So the question is, it doesn't say that it was like completely taken away. It was hidden. So the question becomes, well, where was it hidden? Where is it? So one of the things that the Baal Shem Tov said, and he's not the only one, but he said that the hidden light of God is found in the Torah. That's why the Torah is referred to as Torah or. Ner mitzvah, b'Torah or. A mitzvah is like a candle, an individual flame, but the Torah itself is light. And so he says there's a very deep understanding that when we learn Torah, we are accessing the infinite light of God, the infinite will of God. But we want to take it one step further with something we learned already. And we've mentioned a number of times that the Baal Shem Tov took a very, very strong stand with the disagreement that was happening at the time, whether the teachings of the Arizal about the Tzimtzum, the contraction of God's infinite light in order to create a space for finite worlds, do we understand it literally or figuratively? In Hebrew, it's Tzimtzum kipshuto, the contraction, a real contraction, a literal contraction, or lo kipshuto, not to be taken literally. The Baal Shem Tov was very adamant that we should understand the Tzimtzum as lo pshuto, not in a literal sense. And we learned that the ramifications of this is that this infinite light is still accessible. And not only accessible, what the Baal Shem Tov is saying, it's ever present. This is a huge chiddush from the Baal Shem Tov, is even though we have this concept of God's infinite light hidden away, the Baal Shem Tov was saying it might be hidden, but like the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, just open your eyes and it's here. It's accessible. And not only in the Torah and in Tefillah, but as we've learned, in everything is hidden God's light. But our spiritual work is that we recognize that it's there, that we pray to be able to access it. We make ourselves a fitting vessel, And the infinite light of God is ever present. This is what we learned at the Baal Shem Tov. It's called Hashra'ah, immediate, present experience of godliness and this infinite light. So this is a very, very important teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. Now we go to a very, very interesting idea. And I think I've mentioned, but I'm going to mention it again, that one of the deepest ways to understand the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov are that he took the teachings of the Arizal. The Arizal bases in great measure most of his revelations on his understanding of the Zohar. Really, in a certain way, the Arizal was really the first to, he wasn't the first to try to understand, and he wasn't the first to certainly have deep understandings. The Ramak wrote an entire series of books called Or Yakar, his understanding of the Zohar. But there's no doubt that the Arizal opened up new levels of understanding. And as we know, the teachings of the Arizal are incredibly complex. The Arizal didn't really make an attempt to, at least in the writings, to really explain things. It's kind of like, if you understand, you understand. He was teaching Kabbalists. And so he wasn't like spelling things out for a layman. So what did the Baal Shem Tov do? The Baal Shem Tov knew the teachings of the Arizal. And hopefully in this series, we're going to get to teachings from Keter Shem Tov. Keter Shem Tov is a collection of the deeper teachings of the Baal Shem Tov to his students. It wasn't his like outreach. It wasn't his way of talking to the common person. Keter Shem Tov is the Torahs he gave over to his closest circle. And it's clear that he was a master of Kabbalah, an absolute master of Kabbalah. So I'm mentioning all of this, and this is something I learned from Rav Ginsburg, that 500 years before Einstein revealed the idea of the theory of relativity, he explains that the Arizal was deep into the idea of relativity. And this we learned already, and I'll just review it quickly. This is a teaching from Rav Ginsburg of how to understand the development of Kabbalah, that Kabbalah until and through the Ramak was called Hishtalshalut, a type of learning of cause and effect, chain, links in a chain. The way one thing causes another thing, which causes another thing. Hierarchy, process. The Arizal came and he deepened all of this with what's called hitlabshut, enclothement, a type of holistic learning that is no longer superficial. And the example that we use, because this is something that most of us can understand, is the way that we count Sfirat Omer. In a certain way, until the Arizal, Chesed was Chesed, Gevura is Gevura, Tiferet is Tiferet. Everything is what it is. And yet you have to become a master just to get that. But then the way we count Sfirat Omer is really one of the basic teachings of the Arizal, that everything encloses deeper levels. So all of a sudden, we have chesed sheba chesed, gevura sheba chesed, teferet sheba chesed, netzach, hod, yesod, malchut sheba chesed. Everything, it becomes complex. It's like putting everything through a microscope. You look at whatever it is, a hand, and you see a hand. You put it under a microscope, and all of a sudden you can see every line in the hand. You up the focus, and all of a sudden you can see every hair follicle. Up the focus, you can see the cell. Increase the focus again, you can see every element of the cell. Up it one more time, then you see the atoms that make up this, the every element of the cell. That's what the Ari did. He took reality, but along with that, everything became relative to something else. And we're not going to go into any great discussion, but the ramifications of Hitlat Shut is now everything becomes relative to everything else. So this is a teaching from Rav Ginsburg, that the Arizal was dealing with this idea of relativity way before Einstein. Einstein applied it to space and time and movement and relative, those things, and time, relative to everything else. Mass in motion, all of these things, everything then started to become relative. So we already mentioned that the Baal Shem Tov takes the teachings of the Arizal and he reformulates them in a more psychological, spiritual, personally relevant way. So how did the Baal Shem Tov take this idea of relativity and apply it to reality? So I'm just going to give one example, but this example was such an important part of the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. And that is, and we've discussed this way back at the beginning, that when the Baal Shem Tov came on the scene, there was quite a division in the Jewish world. There were the scholarly elite and what we're going to call the simple Jews. The Jews who were 100% religious, but they weren't very knowledgeable because they didn't have the time. People just barely scratched out a living. And I mean, really barely. And so many people didn't have the opportunity to learn deeper. They knew how to do the mitzvot. They loved to say Tehillim. They were loyal and faithful. But the Baal Shem Tov saw the sterling characteristics of what he would call the simple people. And so many of his teachings were based on the idea that who knows whose mitzvot are more precious in God's eyes, are more important. So he would teach something like this. Let's say you have a Torah scholar who is born with a phenomenal memory, genius IQ, has been through Shas 3 times, but in a certain way could accomplish way more than he does. And then you have the simple Jew who, when he says Tehillim, puts his whole heart and soul into that. And so the Baal Shem Tov started teaching, don't be so sure like who's on top and who's on the bottom here. in God's eyes, someone who says a simple Tehillim might be on a much higher level spiritually than someone who can memorize, the whole Gemara. It depends what you're putting into it. And so here I'm going to tell a story that the Baal Shem Tov, of course, once he revealed himself, became very, very famous. He traveled and he taught, and with quote, the simple people, he would tell stories and parables, and he would deal with their material problems and the needs. In fact, last night, I just want to mention something I mentioned before, that of all Chassidut, the Chassidut that goes back to the Baal Shem Tov more than any other is Chabad. And last night, in honor of the Rebbe, I was watching on YouTube different videos of the Rebbe teaching, and it was amazing. And how many, and most of them are short. They're in Yiddish, but they have the English translation. And he would mention the Baal Shem Tov many, many times. And so when the Baal Shem Tov, he gathered around him his closest followers, they were the ones who, when he passed away, in a sense, created the Hasidic movement. He understood he had to have a core group of scholars who could understand what he was teaching in the deepest way and would continue that. And he succeeded tremendously. Within one generation, a good part of Europe was now Hasidic. It didn't take long. It spread like wildfire. But many times his top core students had a hard time understanding why he spent so much time with the, quote, simple Jews, and why he lauded them so much. The faith that they had, and their loyalty, and how their Mesirat Nefesh, how they would put everything into preserving their Yiddishkeit when they just barely had what to eat. So this story, it's a beautiful story. So one time at third meal, he had his core scholars there. And at one point, he said, everyone be quiet. And he closed his eyes, and they could see that he was going into a state of meditation. And so everyone followed the Baal Shem Tov. And within a short time, they started hearing heavenly music. And like they didn't know where it was coming from, but they were convinced that they were like tuned in to the Baal Shem Tov's meditation, and he was drawing down the angels singing. This is third meal of Shabbat, and everyone goes into this really ecstatic, meditative trance. And after a certain amount of time, the Baal Shem Tov comes out of his meditation, and everyone comes out, and someone asks the Baal Shem Tov, what was that music? Were you connecting us to the angels? Like, were we right by God's throne of glory? We've never heard anything like this. So the Baal Shem Tov says, be quiet again and concentrate. So they concentrated, and they realized what they were hearing was in the Beit Knesset, These were the so-called simple Jews reciting Tehillim. And this is how the Baal Shem Tov tried to show them that you have to break free from your preconceived notions of Torah and Tefillah, and like relatively who's more important, who has God's ear, as it were. It's a very, very beautiful, very, very beautiful story. And now I just want to share something that happened to me that makes the same idea. It was Tisha B'Av, and I was at the Diaspora Yeshiva at the time on Har Zion, and we were sitting, the whole yeshiva with the Rosh Yeshiva, we were sitting on the floor, as is appropriate on Tisha B'Av. We were in the room next to the tomb of David HaMelech. David HaMelech is, we'll put it, it's supposedly buried right there. We do know that he's buried somewhere in the area. Not 100% that he's right there, but according to tradition, that's the tomb of King David. I'll mention in passing that my wife and I got married on the roof of the tomb of David HaMelech. Literally, literally on Har Zion. And we were there for hours saying keynote. And so to get to the tomb of David HaMelech, you had to walk through the room that we were. And, you know, it's Tisha B'Av, it's summer, so there weren't a lot of people out in the middle of the day. Anyways, at a certain point, after being there for hours, a Sephardi woman, maybe in her 50s, 60s, 70s, comes through the room and goes into the tomb of David HaMelech. And 1 minute later, we hear crying and like unconsolable crying. And I'll never forget the Rosh Yeshiva, who was, I'll say, Alav Shalom, Rabbi Goldstein. He was far from being a chassid. But he said to the whole yeshiva, he said, do you see what just happened here? He said, we've been sitting here for hours. We have not shed one tear, including myself. Not one tear. This woman comes in and the gates of heaven, she's opening the gates of heaven with her tears. Like, what do we know? I'll never forget that. That was kind of like being in the room with the Baal Shem Tov when he was trying to teach his students, like, let's break down this class division that's been set up here. There's like, there are no elites here. There's only Yidden. So that's how the Baal Shem Tov took this idea of relativity from the Arizal, but he made it personal. He made it like relevant, made it totally relevant. And there's actually scores of stories from the Baal Shem Tov in this theme of his trying to teach his students and his spiritual teachers. From age 16 to 26, his teacher was Eliyahu Navi. And from 26 to 36, and really the rest of his life, was Achia Hashiloni. Those were his spiritual masters. And both of them taught the Baal Shem Tov the secret. And they would send him to certain people to learn certain lessons. Very fascinating. Hopefully, if we continue, I would say towards the end of the series, then we'll do stories. We'll get to many, many stories of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, now let's go to the next teaching. And this is something many, many people have heard, that it says in the Zohar, there are, we'll call them two predictions. The Zohar is not a prophetic book per se, but it made two predictions. One prediction was in the 600th year of the sixth millennium, the well springs of the lower waters from the abyss will rise up and flood the world, and the water from above, call it rain, will come down and also flood the world. So everyone asks, well, what does that mean? What does it mean in the 600th year of the sixth millennium? So many people have heard this, is the 600th year of the sixth millennium was 1840. 5600. Because in the we're now at 5784, but this is the sixth millennium. When we reach 6000 begins the seventh millennium. So many people understand that it's the century between 1740 and 1840. So what are the waters from below the abyss that will flood the world? This is called secular knowledge. What is the waters from above that will come down? It is the wisdom of the Torah. So let's just look quickly what happens between 1740 and 1840. Between 1740 and 1840 is the Industrial Revolution. That changed everything. The cotton gin, the steam engine, the first steamboats, trains, everything was starting to change. Everything. Modes of transportation, agriculture, everything. By 1900, you have the telegraph, you have Kitty Hawk, you have Edison, you have electricity. And in the 140 years since then, look what we have. In other words, from Kitty Hawk to flying a mission to Mars is only 120 years. In other words, secular knowledge and technology has flooded the world. So, but what happened from above in Torah wisdom? So many things happen, but I think the most important thing is the Baal Shem Tov revealed himself in 1736, right before 1740. And he passes away in 1760. Within 20 or 30 years, Hasidus is spread all over the world. And with it, the teachings of Kabbalah and Hasidut. So this is a very, very important understanding of, call it the historical role of the Baal Shem Tov. It's not just that he initiated the Hasidic movement, but nothing has been the same since the Baal Shem Tov. And in a certain way, nothing will be the same after the Rebbe. The Rebbe was that kind of once in a century, a couple of centuries, kind of personality that everything changes after that. The Jewish world has totally changed in a certain way. Of all of Jewish life, the most important element right now is Chabad, because they're everywhere and they're touching everyone. They're everywhere and they're touching everyone. So just like we can understand, and the Rebbe did it in 40 years. When he started in Crown Heights, when he became Rebbe, 1951, there was like a few handful of Chabadniks in Crown Heights. And when he passes away, there are Chabad institutions around the world. And like I said, it is quadrupled since then, absolutely quadrupled. So the Baal Shem Tov, this so we can understand in a certain way, because he opened the gate to the inner dimension of the Torah to the masses. And this is the second prediction of the Zohar. The second prediction was on the merit of the teaching. This is in the Zohar. The merit of the teachings in this book, meaning the revelation of the inner dimensions of the Torah, Israel will come out of exile berachamim, in compassion. In other words, the Zohar was predicting that part and parcel of the coming of the Messianic era depends on the revelation of these deep teachings. And that's why when the Baal Shem Tov in 1741, I believe, had an Aliyah to Neshama in Rosh Hashanah, and he's in the presence of the soul of the Mashiach, and he asked him, when is the master coming? And the Mashiach put it back on the Baal Shem Tov. He says, when the well springs, here again you have the water, when the well springs of your teachings spread to the farthest reaches, that is when Mashiach will come. So here we see the role of the Baal Shem Tov in a historic context here. It wasn't that he was just initiating a new movement. It was a movement that, according to these ideas, will bring us to Mashiach. Will bring us to Mashiach. Bezrat Hashem. Bezrat Hashem. Now a short teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. And I don't have a deeper explanation from the Baal Shem Tov himself, but I remember this so well. I have not been to Yad Vashem in many, many years. But I went a number of times, but since then it's been redone a couple of times, new buildings, they redid the whole thing. So I can't comment on what it's like now. But in the first decades of Yad Vashem, and I'm sure most of the people listening were probably there at least once, it used to be that when you would go through the main building, that was more like the museum. And when you would come out, there was a quote on the wall from the Baal Shem Tov. And it said, it was in Hebrew and English, it said, the secret of redemption is remembering. And the secret of exile is forgetting. And it said, the Baal Shem Tov. And it was in Hebrew and English, like big, big letters. It's like the last thing you saw when you went out of the building. So obviously the Baal Shem Tov was tapping into this idea of collective memory, the importance of collective memory in Jewish ritual, Jewish life, Jewish consciousness. If you just think, like, that is what the Seder of Pesach is. The Seder of Pesach was the Haggadah is a brilliant, brilliant educational tool to help us not just remember, but to relive and to visualize the reality of exile and redemption. And that the secret of exile is when we forget about Eretz Yisrael, we forget about Yerushalayim, we forget about our connection to Torah, and that leads to assimilation. But in general, the Jewish people were incredibly stiff-necked about never giving up the collective memory of Eretz Yisrael, of Yerushalayim, and the belief that we will return one day. And of course, there's no historical precedent on the face of the earth of a people scattered and oppressed for 2,000 years who, first of all, even survived as a people. There is no precedent, but were able to return to their homeland. And that's because of collective memory. So that's what the Baal Shem was giving over. The secret of redemption is to remember. Okay, we're going to end with one more, and it's connected. It's very connected. We know that the Baal Shem Tov attempted to come to Eretz Yisrael. He received signs from heaven. Don't do it. It's not the right time. The Baal Shem Tov so much wanted to come to Eretz Yisrael. He believed that if he came and he got together with the Or Chaim, that they could bring Mashiach. From its inception, the Hasidic movement is basically messianic in its direction, its thrust, its belief. The Lubavitcher Rebbe really renewed that fervor for bringing the Mashiach. But one of the teachings in the Baal Shem Tov, it's a very simple teaching, but it's so relevant. And he said, and he had prophecy. He said, when we come back to Eretz Yisrael, it's crucial that the passion, the faith, the love of Eretz Yisrael that we had while we were longing for it in exile, that once we get there, we have to maintain it. And he said, in order that we'll be able to hold on to the land, we have to hold on to the same level of desire and passion that we had when we were just dreaming about it. And it's so true. It's so true that we can get used to anything. People, it's just part of human nature. We take things for granted in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of manners. And the Baal Shem was trying to teach us that for us to be able to hold on to Eretz Yisrael, we have to have this overriding passion to be here. And I can say that with all of the incredible tragedy of these last 9 months, and we're not out of the woods by any means, but one of the things that happened, there definitely was a renewal of people realizing how much we love Eretz Yisrael, and we have to show that and strengthen that. And this is Jews all over the world, not just not just here. We cannot take our being here for granted anymore. We just can't. And so what the Baal Shem was teaching us is very, very real right now. And of course, the ones who are showing the way are our holy soldiers. And especially because if you remember, right before October 7th, there was a whole movement to not report to the army anymore. It had gotten that bad, the division in the people had gotten so bad that it was like, well, if the government gets its way with judicial reform, we're not going into the army anymore. And then October 7th comes. Not only did everyone go, but people who didn't even have to go volunteered. Thousands of Israelis came from Chutz La'aretz to be back in Israel for to be part of the really war of survival here. Hopefully we can keep that level of desire and feeling our connection to Eretz Yisrael and the privilege we have to have Eretz Yisrael, and we should never, ever, ever take it for granted. And this is really a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. And so we should, wherever we are, we should try to spread that message that now is the time to stand up for our Judaism, stand up for the land of Israel, and Bezrat Hashem, we will see good things. Hold on. Again, I'm having a problem with my mouse. There we go. Okay.